Woo, thank you guys. I can't believe it's already 3 o'clock, a little after 3. What we're going to do over the next hour is really start to get into the nuts and bolts of an adaptation plan. And I thought, let's just start by show of hands. How many of you have already completed a vulnerability assessment? So looking at your vulnerabilities, your climate threats. All right, see, tons of pros in the room. Oh, okay. Lisa wants to know, are you done with it, or who's done with theirs? All right, who's got a vulnerability assessment in process? Lisa is theorizing that you're never really done, and that's actually a very deep statement. So you're right. But this is how we think of the adaptation planning process, and you're free to say this is not how I think of it, and I do it a different way. But we looked at across a lot of different frameworks, and this is the one that sort of has stuck with us that we use for our training purposes. And what I love about starting this way and having really spent a lot of the day diving in to so many of the hardships that we have faced and really allowing ourselves some space to feel it is now we get to really think about this process that we can undergo as a community that to adapt. And adapting meaning we can actually prevent a lot of the negative health effects that we've been talking about. And just hearing from you, hearing all these strategies that you just brought up and all these in the breakouts, like not only are you exchanging that information with each other, but just know that's feeding us too at the Tribal Climate Health Project. We're probably going to go and store those in our Easy tool and share those out with other tribes. And there's just I'm overwhelmed with the number of things that we all can be doing within our communities to prepare and safeguard lives. So that's what an adaptation plan really is attempting to do. You conduct it so you can decide how to roll out the most effective interventions or strategies to reduce key vulnerabilities and improve climate resilience. So there isn't one right way. You typically can incorporate all sorts of different models from each other. And you're hoping to just decide how to roll it out. How are you going to roll out all these good ideas that your community is coming up with? And how are you going to narrow a list down to what's really feasible, right? We could live in an environment. I really liked what Lori was doing in the back with storms and flooding. And that she said, if you had endless dollars, what would you do? Sadly, that's not our situation. So some part of the adaptation planning process is what can we feasibly do in a staggered or phased amount of time? Trying to put our best foot and our biggest bucks where they belong, where they're going to be most useful. And there's a lot of different ways to go about it. So a lot of different kinds of professionals can be involved. You know, a lot of us in the room consider ourselves climate professionals, but other folks are doing health and climate work as well. Is there anybody here who considers themselves more of a public health professional? Okay, we got one. I know it's probably Osamu. Oh, a couple back here. Yeah, so they have their own framework of planning, and it's not new, but it can be used to also address climate change. So usually public health folks will do something called a community health assessment, and then afterwards, it's the same two-step approach. What are the problems, and then how are we going to fix it, right? So a health assessment looks for what the problems are, and then they come out with a community health improvement plan. Usually it's what it's called, and you can come up with all these strategies. Those plans can be really effective with climate change as well, as long as they're incorporating climate projections or climate information into it. Not just looking at how to solve for the health issues of today, but to look ahead to what the trends are showing us and what's going to change in the next 20 years or so. And on the other side, emergency management, right? I'm sure a lot of you are working hand in hand. If you have an emergency management person within your tribe, that these two issues have already intersected. Does that sound right? Some of you are the same person, probably. You do emergency planning as well as climate planning. Same thing, hazard mitigation plan. Identify the problems, and usually an emergency management plan or some emergency preparedness plan. This two-step process. Same thing, more and more I'm starting to see hazard mitigation plans also include and incorporate climate information. Maybe they didn't before. Maybe they were using the historical trends, just continuing the historical trend lines for things like flood, landslides, fire, and just assuming we're going to see the same trajectory. And now having to think a little harder about the hazard mitigation plans to think about that trajectory is no longer as predictable and will certainly be looking different. And how do we prepare for that? So, the great news and what you all have been sharing with us all day today is that tribes are adapting to protect well-being. And that's despite a lot of these capacity issues and institutional barriers that we've talked about. And so this is just, quoting what a lot of you all have shared, similar sentiments that barriers include limited access to traditional territory and limitations of existing policies, programs, and funding mechanisms that account for the unique conditions of Indigenous communities. So lots of institutionalized barriers where you can't do the things that would help protect your community because there may be some kind of policy or legal barrier. Okay, but let's get into the nuts and bolts, and I actually want you all to be thinking critically as we walk through this. It doesn't have to necessarily be a linear process, but there are general steps to take, right? To try to understand what your vulnerability, how to address the vulnerabilities. So, like I said, in the last year we did a whole summit on vulnerability, and we walked through the steps of a vulnerability assessment. Now we're going to assume that you know what those are. You know what those vulnerabilities are. Sometimes a community will do both of these at once, right? You'll collapse it all into one report. Has anybody done that here where you talk all about vulnerabilities and all about your strategies all together, not in two separate reports? Yeah, sometimes that makes sense. We typically, the way we talk about it is as two separate reports, but you can do it any way you like. Sometimes I like to bring a vulnerability assessment first to a set of tribal decision makers so that they have a chance to really absorb and dive in and agree with or change what the real conditions and problems are, because that sets a really important foundation so that you can really tackle those things that are most critical, that are representing your greatest threats. And so helping to narrow those things down, prioritize them, and agree as a community, okay, this is what to solve for. And with that clear mind, you walk into an adaptation planning process, really attempting to now brainstorm around, navigate around how to really solve these issues, these vulnerabilities. So the first step, well, there's typically a 5-step process that we talk about. The first step is what we consider to determine objectives and scope. So what is that? That means, what are you actually going to study here or plan for here? And so that might look like, did you get any specific direction from your tribal council? So maybe at Paula, they're saying, hey, do an adaptation plan specifically for transportation. And we did that, right? So that's a very specific thing to look at. And that was partially because there was a grant for it. And so we were able to do a really specific one for that. Most of you are probably doing comprehensive adaptation plans where you're going to cover all things climate change. But that could be super overwhelming to do. So it really depends on your resources. So part of this scoping process is looking at what is your capacity, your resources, where's the money coming from, and does it come with direction? Does it limit the scope of what you're going to do? Or maybe your tribal council just has a really particular urgent need to look at something specific. And so at this point, if you've done a 2-phase process where your vulnerability assessment came first, this is an opportunity to, are you going to continue on that trajectory? Are you going to look at, say, you've decided to look at if you have a reservation, your reservation. Maybe you decided to look at all your ancestral lands. In your adaptation plan where you're going to solve for things, are you going to continue at that scale? Are you going to shrink it? Are you going to grow it? Meaning, maybe you looked at all of your ancestral lands on all the different exposures. So you looked at wildfire, temperature extreme, storms and flooding, sea level rise, all of it. And you looked at all the possible impacts. But in your adaptation plan, maybe you only want to focus on critical facilities. Or maybe you only want to focus on impacts to natural environment. You can cut it a lot of different ways. I think the majority of you are probably looking at this comprehensively, and there's trade-offs, right? There's reasons to do it. It may be more work at this to protect this community. And I like to watch the community's eyes light up with ideas. And what I love about this process too is that I like to mine the ideas from all the relevant places that I can. So that just looks like this first step is compiling a long list of strategies that address the vulnerability impacts Um, and the great news is, every time I start this process, we're never starting from scratch, right? So each tribe is already doing a lot. And so you might be looking back in your traditional practices, or even just in the last 10 years, you realize if I thought of it this way, I've actually done a heck of a lot. Maybe you've already done your catchment systems, or you've created a committee, or you've created backup power. You're probably already doing a lot. You just didn't label it climate change. And that's okay, but we're going to take stock of what you've already done, and we're going to give you some credit, give your community some credit for the adaptive capacity it's already built. And then we're going to build on it. We're going to try to add where there are not enough strategies to really resolve or mitigate the threats that may be coming. And so there's a lot of different ways to generate an initial list. The first one we'll talk about is just identifying existing actions. So we just talked about that. You could research. You could just go out researching more actions. Part of that is you can go around and look at each other's adaptation plans, which we're actually going to do in a little bit. And you can mine strategies or ideas from there. You can come together in groups like this, where we actually talk to each other and give each other ideas. We're going to do more of that tomorrow. We're going to workshop some help for you all. And, otherwise you can just be inviting the right people into the room and brainstorming together. So what I think is really critical is getting the planning team right. And so hopefully that's just not just you. In some communities, I know that that's the way it happens. You got a grant, it's a little bit under the radar, everybody's super busy, you got a small community, you have to write a thing, and it's done. Ideally, you've built a planning team, you have the capacity to actually manage a planning team that you bring together so that there's more voices involved, more perspectives. At Paula and other communities that I have worked with, we bring in the fire folks, we bring in sometimes the law enforcement folks, we bring in the facilities folks, we bring in, if there's any kind of like public works or power facilities, we bring in those folks. If there's somebody in the health profession, we bring in those folks. Oftentimes we borrow from a committee that already exists, like you might have an emergency committee already. I heard somebody talk about a Turk. Is that a common thing, the Turk? Okay. You could repurpose an existing committee that already has an interdepartmental perspective. And then a really great thing about bringing those people in now is that you're going to get not only their ideas, but their buy-in. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to be just you guys implementing all of these strategies, right? Thank God, unless you're Shasta and you volunteer for all of them. But so much of the work has to happen outside of you. You're going to be the person to identify and help operationalize some of it, but you're not going to be the one building a culvert, probably, with your bare hands. You're going to need to bring in some help. So we actually have a tool, and I wanted to just share it with you, although I probably have shared it before. If you've ever been to a tribal climate health thing, I will share it with you. Actually, on the right there, we categorize adaptation strategies. So we've all been talking about strategies a lot today. We usually categorize them in different ways, and so you don't have to do it this way, but it just helps us think about all the different kinds of things we can do to adapt. And so you might just look under all these rocks. So go back one. So there are a lot of things we can do that are policy, planning, and land use related. You can do things that are more about community engagement and notification. You can make infrastructure improvements. You can do a lot with data information technology. Some things we think of as operations and management, and other things are cross-agency collaborations. It doesn't really matter how we label these, but it's just all the different ways that I think you guys have the various authorities and opportunities to act. And the reason why that maybe makes sense to talk about here is this horrible spreadsheet. It's called the Exposures, Impacts, and Strategies Inventory, and it's basically what we've done to mine all of what we could learn from what tribes are doing across the country to help make it easier for you to not only look at your vulnerabilities, but also brainstorm, start thinking about your strategies. And so what I'm showing here is tab 3 of our Easy tool. You'll be happy to know we are partnering with others to turn this into a more user-friendly web-based tool. For now, it's in Excel. And what it really is attempting to do, it's a long list of over 150 strategies. So like I said, those strategies you're talking about today, anything that's new from there, we'll keep it anonymous, but we'll add them here because this is like a bank of ideas. That's all it is. It's a list of potential ideas that's filterable. So say I'm having temperature extremes and it's affecting our physical health. There's filters here that you can just filter those down and you could look at strategies that could potentially help with that. So you don't have to start from scratch. And if all this does is just give you some ideas to start with, and then you think, okay, well, that makes me think I can do it this other way, then great. Take from it what you like, add to it, whatever. This whole thing ends up being an editable worksheet that you can use to continue the planning process. Once you brainstorm a bunch of strategies, you can also use it to evaluate those strategies. And we'll talk a little bit about how to narrow down the list of strategies into something a little bit more manageable. Because we could probably all sit around for a 4-hour meeting coming up with 10,000 ideas, but at some point you need to narrow it down to a list of things that we can realistically do, right? So if brainstorming is the funnest part, narrowing down is the most painful part to me. Because, we want to do it all. And we don't have the time or money probably to do it all, at least right now. All right, so all this is to say is that there's all sorts of different adaptation strategies that are being conducted right now all throughout the country. And you guys have already talked about a lot of them. But, just to mention a few others that maybe we haven't talked about yet. So temperature extremes, we're seeing tribes do things like hoop houses and greenhouses and using solar power to protect food crops. Seeing some tribes doing early warning systems and alerts. We're seeing tribes promote food cooperatives or CSA programs or developing tribal gardens. For storms and flooding, we're seeing folks conduct education to help residents avoid food and water supply issues. We are seeing them do regional climate adaptation dashboards. So, a lot you can do with just data, especially on the flooding side of things. Like tracking could be really important. A lot of you might be tracking your precipitation, but are you tracking rain? Are you actually tracking storm events so that you know where the recurring flooding issues are happening on your reservation so that you could tackle those next, put those in line to be tackled. So just some examples from around the country. A good place to mine for other ideas too, if you want to, is to go to the BIA Tribal Resilience Program. Some of you might have already been funded out of that, but you can go and look. They have a database or a map that you can click in and you can actually get access to some of the reports. Or ITEP, fantastic resource. They have a lot of plans that they like to share as well, and you can look, what are other people doing? And we'll do that a little bit together today. We talked a little bit about strategies, different kinds of strategies, and I think you guys already did a good job of this, better than I can do. But just to say, I think we've emphasized already that culturally traditional health and healing strategies have a complete place here. So as you are developing health strategies, we would just encourage you to incorporate the things that your community is already strong in, has a tradition and a trajectory in. And that might look like, don't forget about your native diets, or talking circles, or storytelling, herbal remedies, ceremonies. You all know this. You all know what you already have. There's an example. It's like, sometimes I think tribes maybe are doing all of these things already and they're doing them so well. And then the question or the hard part becomes, what if we want to do it more? Like, how do we build it? How do you build it from scratch if you wanted to do it? So, one example is, San Diego's American Indian Health Center developed elder circles. So say, for example, we know that there's a lot of elders in a community. They're especially vulnerable to all of these health conditions that we've been talking about. And we really want to help them connect with each other and have more of a social space, have a little bit more social connection and cohesion. We could encourage them to circle up by developing a circle program if there isn't one already, right? I think a lot of tribes may already have like an elders program or a senior kind of gathering program. And then, we were talking with Laverne about these psychosocial spiritual resilience strategies, and just to say that Paula has developed its own little framework here for that, trying to mine from the research. How do we do this on a community scale? So we can build our own psychosocial resilience. We can teach ourselves how to do the biological moderating strategies, breathe and meditate and walk, talk to a friend. But how do we do that on a community scale? So for you guys as staff members, how are you going to help protect people psychologically, spiritually, from the impacts of climate change? That is so hard. I mean, it might be something like, well, let's make sure we understand what the mental health resources are around here. Maybe that's one thing, just knowing where they are, being able to point people to something. Or maybe you'll find that there's a gap. We have no crisis counselors available in this region. Maybe we need to develop a crisis counseling program or identify somebody who can. But a lot of the recommendations that we've received are really around informal care, right? How do communities care for themselves and each other? And one of the best things I ever heard was the best thing you could do to prepare for climate change is to get to know your neighbor. But can you operationalize that? Or do you even need to? Maybe your community is so tight knit, they're gathering, they know each other. I know somebody here was a tribal member or tribal council member was going door to door to all the elders in a disaster. Great. Maybe your community is more dispersed now than it used to be. Maybe the community cohesion's a little bit tougher. Do you need to rebuild some of that cultural or community cohesion, and how? Could you host a gathering, host a new kind of gathering, host a dinner, have a different kind of conversation? It's more of a question because I think there's a lot of ways to do it, but we got to think about like community scale operations, right? Like how do you move it up so you actually put a whole community ahead and get ahead of the next disaster so that the next time the wildfire and floods come, people are actually more psychologically prepared. That's hard. All right, those are just some examples of like brainstorming strategies, but at some point, you actually have to evaluate your strategies. Evaluate your strategies so that you can develop a short list. Like we were saying, you can't do 10,000, for example. You may be able to do 40, I don't know, a reasonable chunk of things. So you want to apply your limited resources where they're most effective. And that really means getting serious about things like need. All right, this is a good idea, but is it really needed? And all I do there usually is I have like a table and I ask a community to rank high, medium, or low in terms of need. All right, we want to do, green infrastructure. We want to restore, a marsh. The need for that might be really high, but then we also looked at the feasibility. So those two things, need and feasibility. At least that's how I do it. You might do it in a different way. You won't have probably the time or money to do full feasibility on a billion different strategies in an adaptation plan. I think that's one of the hard parts too. To make a really good decision, you would need a lot of information around like costs and other potential barriers to getting something big done. What you can do is kind of high level, do like a high level feasibility analysis. The things I typically look like are, do we have staff capacity? Are there any massive legal barriers for us doing this? And is it excessively expensive? So those are the kinds of high level questions I might ask. And so you might have a really high need, but the feasibility at the end of the day is super low. So you just high, medium, or low feasibility, low. It's a low feasibility. So that might not be something we can do right now. Maybe that's something we plan to do 10 years out. These are where the hard choices get made, and where being specific kind of really matters, because at some point you're going to put dollars to action, and you're going to give direction to real human beings like you. You're going to give direction to yourself and your colleagues in other departments to do something by a certain deadline. What we don't want to do is take on more than we can chew, which I think every single person in here probably does with your big hearts. You want to dish yourself out a reasonable plate. And then just a note here to say involve stakeholders to improve viability. So this is also where it really matters to have a team around you. The last thing you want to do is be the person who put X department head's name into an adaptation plan to do a big thing that you never asked them whether they could do. Only because you don't want a dust collecting report. You want a report with teeth that you can actually execute and that people have confidence in it and they're going to come, they're going to rally around you to make sure it gets done. I hate dust collecting reports. What we try to do is make them as actionable as possible. And part of that means assigning it, giving it a home within a unit of your government to actually make something happen. But oftentimes that means maybe you meet them in person, go talk to them. Here's what we're thinking. Can you do this? And why don't you help me understand by when you can do this? And help me understand what resources you might need to get this done. And they'll tell you, no way to this one, but here's a better idea. Or maybe you all come together as one workshop and work it out together. And then, this little last piece here, what I like to do, sometimes you've done such a good job brainstorming, and then you've narrowed down the list. Don't forget to go back and look at your vulnerabilities and say, did we really solve for the most important ones or did we not? Because you've washed down your list now, you've narrowed it down. Make sure that you've actually taken care of those really critical things. So you might have forgot that in your vulnerability assessment, water security was your number one concern, drought or water security. And in your actual adaptation plan, you don't have enough strategies to really solve for it. So you want to make sure your strategies are solving for the most critical needs in, an appropriate amount of time. All right, we just have 4 and 5 left. So step 4 is just to organize those strategies that you've selected into an action plan. I know this seems very linear and wonky. I've seen it done other ways. I've seen people just do videos of what their adaptation plan is. But oftentimes you're going to see it in the form of a report. What I always suggest is that rather than just describing a strategy narratively, to actually organize it into a plan. So what I was showing you before with the easy tool, I have it here again. So over here, and I'll just explain what I'm showing you. So these are the strategies. After you've evaluated those strategies for need and feasibility, you're going to have a narrowed down list. Maybe you've added your own stuff in here. You're going to have a narrowed down list. Once it's narrow, what you can do is under the planning details right here, which just means let's look high level at some of the specific implementation that you anticipate doing for this particular strategy. So that looks like, give it a time frame. Is this thing, am I going to build a hoop house in 1 year or 5 years or 20 years? Who's the responsible department? All right, I'm the environmental department, I'll take that one. Or I went and talked to facilities, they'll take that one. Who are the other involved departments? Because it's very likely there'll be interdepartmental strategies where you might need more than one. And what other potential partners do you have on deck that you can bring in? And then if you know anything about budget or potential resource needs, you can mark that down as well. And so at this point, you go from like a kind of scattered list of strategies that don't really have a place in time to you kick the ball a little further down the field, and when the thing's adopted, you have people assigned to things in a time frame, and you can transition that into like an implementation plan. That's something to check off, to track the progress against. It's a little more accountable. And the last thing is just to synthesize it into a report. And we are going to do a little activity just to look at some reports. The one you see up in the right there is what I said is available to you all. We have a Word version of the PALA adaptation plan that you can just download and make your own. We're very happy if you do that. It's organized the way we organize this training by exposures. We look at the exposures, we look at all the impacts of the exposures. That's in the vulnerability assessment. Then we take that and we do a plan. We organize the strategies Usually I do it by those adaptation plan categories or the adaptation strategy categories. So I'm like, here's all of our community outreach strategies. Here's all of our planning strategies. Here's all of our data information technology strategies. There's so many ways to slice and dice it. I've seen some really beautiful plans out there that are much more lovely than what I can produce. And so let's just look at a few of them. Like I said, some people actually have just done videos, and that's lovely too. Sometimes it's a presentation. Oftentimes it's a report, right? So one thing I'll just say, you're going to end up drafting a report in a draft version, and then like every other report, you probably go and get it reviewed, right? You don't want to just stamp final on it without anybody looking, because that's a recipe to get your head chopped off. So you just have to make some hard decisions about who do you want to be part of your review. Maybe tribal council gets a chance to see it before stamped final. I've seen that happen. Or maybe at least get those folks that are named as responsible to look. All right. We're going to see how well this little exercise goes. This will be the last thing we do before our real exercise of going on a walk. Actually, let me stop. Were there any questions about that before we look at a few examples of adaptation reports? Yes. Are you talking about the easy tool or the report? Yeah, we are constantly, and actually poor Serena helps me constantly update our easy tool. And so there's a version that's being updated again right now. So every time we learn of new data sets that might be useful for you or new strategies, we update it. But it is available. So, I think what we'll do after this whole conference, we're going to give you a download of some useful links. But this one's all on our website, tribalclimatehealth.org. Easy to access. And all you do is download. You could just download the Excel document. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah. So we have some sessions next week where we're going to ask folks like you that have actually done adaptation plans to give us some tips and tricks about how to make them actionable. So nope, other ones, but you too. I'm sure you'll chime in. But we have a panel for that tomorrow too. All right, so let's try this. Who has a laptop with internet access right now? Raise your hand high. We need at least 5. Okay. I would like everybody that has the ability to download your worksheet, like the workbook, this guy. This is the QR code that you can just snap a photo of it. It'll take you to the website where it exists. Totally can. Yep. And once you get in there, yeah, we're going to go to page 16 in your workbook, and that's where there are links to 5 different reports. Pick one. Just pick one report. All we're going to do all we're doing is a quick scan here, just because I want you to have the experience of looking at another tribe's report and seeing like, what the heck is this thing supposed to look like? And so we're looking at, is there 4 or 5? Oh, there's 4. Good, even better. So we're going to think about what did you like or not like about the structure and flow, what types of information sources were referenced, and did the report provide sufficient information to help the tribe implement the selected strategy? So just keep those in the back of your mind as you're looking at some examples. Now, if you don't have a phone or laptop, you can find a friend. So we're going to huddle together and share. Is that all right? Can we do that? Okay. All right, so we're going to give this just like 10 minutes. 10 minutes just to breeze through a report and then chat about it.
We also have 5 actual hard copies of Dennis's adaptation plan. that are for real. Tina, we have those, right? So if some of you want to gather around one of the 5 copies of the adaptation plan that he brought, then you can do that instead of going online. So thank you, Dennis, for bringing those, because I know how happy you were when that got approved. And the printouts are just beautiful. It's like a coffee table book. You want to take it home with you.
All right, everybody. So that was just a little time to do a quick scan. I'm so pleased that everybody was able to access a report. And so what I'm really just going to do here is ask for your feedback, and you could stick to the prompts, or you could share what other thoughts you had as you scan. But we're really just like, what value can you pull out of these things? What critical thoughts do you have about it? Not critical. If you want to criticize, fine. But you could say, well, I wish this was done differently, or wow, that's a really good idea. I'm going to incorporate it into mine. And Bridget over here was giving me some good feedback about the one she reviewed. Do you want to go first?
So I had the opportunity before I came here to look at the Karuk. And I don't know how to roll my R's, but I know that the proper pronunciation is, so sorry. But their adaptation plan, and it was big and it was beautiful. And I felt like it was a great incorporation of Western science and traditional knowledge. However, my less positive feedback would be at that final column where they're saying, okay, here's all the problems, here's what we're going to do about it. It seemed vague on there. This is what we're going to do about it. It was a lot of repetition of cooperation of this department and that department. We'll cooperate with this, we'll cooperate with that. And I thought, well, I want more specifics for my plan than that, when I get to the point where we're creating it. And then someone else mentioned, well, maybe they kept it vague for privacy reasons. Maybe, but then does that mean there's another document somewhere that's internal where they do have the specifics? I don't know, but that's what I'm tossing around in my mind.
Bridget, who else would like to share some thoughts on the report that they reviewed?
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon again. I work with a nonprofit tribal organization, and we're kind of partnering with tribes in the North Coast. And our job is to kind of basically assist them with creating this climate adaptation plan. But I guess I'm just more kind of concerned on where, or how we should start off. We've worked on a vulnerability assessment already, and we've come up with questions. We kind of use the 4th climate assessment as our basis, like the 5 things that they thought was an issue. But I guess my question is more should we kind of have it broader so we can really find out what the issues are coming from the tribe? Or is it more are we limiting their issues just because we're focusing on those 5 things? Should we kind of have a discussion first with the tribes and then kind of come up with our questions there? Did we do it a little bit backwards? That's kind of where I'm at right now.
I love that comment because I feel like you could go either way, right? This top-down approach where I'm going to take this report and I'm going to try to downscale it for my community and we're going to figure out what's what, or the other way, right? So ground up. And I've seen it done both ways. Does anybody have advice for her? I think you can go either way. I like to try to do it both ways where you don't completely taint the community with what Western science has said and you're listening a little bit first and then you're able to pull the pieces together. Anybody else have any response to that? Lori.
Not only is it beautiful, it's got amazing pictures in it. It gives you a feeling of the community. I've never been there, and I feel like I know it. The other thing that I really liked about this plan is it doesn't end. It ends with survey questions. So as it ends, it goes to the beginning again and keeps the community, I assume, engaged. But it's lovely, and you don't have to use a computer to read it.
Lori, okay, well, maybe one more set of thoughts on a report that you reviewed. Anybody else? Is everybody getting sleepy and they're ready for a walk? All right. It feels like it's getting dark already. Oh, okay, do it, buddy.
reflecting on the plan that we were looking at, and it did such a good job of telling the story of the history of the people and the history of the place, and then relating that history to the values that they want, that community and that government wants to guide their future work. And so it was just such a powerful way of connecting who the land and the people and their relationship to each other, where that history comes from, what the stories that guide that, and then how that then turns into who they are and what they want to be working on moving forward. I was very moved by that.
That's a really good point. My favorite ones are always the ones that really look and feel like the community they're from and incorporate, quotes and testimonials and stories and pictures, and see yourself in it. The community has to be able to see themselves in it. And then I like at the back end for me to think about the poor person who's going to implement it and be in charge of it. Are they going to get handed this thing and go, uh-oh, now what? Now what do I do? Or is it going to give them a little bit more information about how?